The story begins with the regular online game BioShock becoming the best in its genre, where players are presented with a huge, exciting world of battles with monsters. The events took place in a post-apocalyptic dimension, and unique people were formed through genetic engineering, who soon formed many alliances with their ideology, but the main goal was the destruction of demons. As players progressed, they became less content with simple monster-slaying quests. As a result, the developers began creating new storylines to add variety to the game. The main character, in turn, decided to immerse himself in a fascinating virtual world, where he unexpectedly had to play the role of a zombified character, which he was not very happy about. No one knew how many regions in the game were in danger, or how cruel this world was. The starting point of this journey was the City of Silence, where players faced off against a monster invasion. Those who thought of themselves as heroes very quickly realized that in reality this was not the case at all. Suddenly, a huge three-headed Cerberus, which was the boss's pet, appeared on the battlefield. The demon was extremely strong, and most players could not cope with such a dangerous opponent. At that moment, the young master appeared with his incredible team of warriors. Zung immediately began to attack the enraged people with his magical abilities, who could do nothing to counter Fang's unimaginable power. The guy took full advantage of his advantage in the battle and continued to beat them. Susu suddenly urged him not to be overly active as she also wanted to fight them. However, the Beetle Queen objected to her, saying that there were enough people for everyone, and they would not retire anytime soon. At the same time, she was distinguished by her bloodthirstiness, and even began to speak about how exactly it was necessary to deal with them. Seeing Cui and Zai eating lunch, Zung invited them to join him, but the girls refused because the main forces of the human alliance were approaching. Fangu knew that the battle would not be easy, since the highest-ranked players had come to them. Playing the villain, the teenager decided to tell his story about how exactly it happened. I started telling the story from the very first day of my carefree life when this video game appeared in it, where he was constantly bullied and extorted money from his peers. Despite the fact that his father was in an extremely poor condition in the hospital, naturally, Zung did not agree with this state of affairs and constantly tried to fight back. However, he wasn't very good at doing this, so he had to endure it. Suddenly, girls passing by stood up for him and demanded that this conflict be stopped. One of them turned out to be a teacher, Yeyu, and she couldn't allow the ragamuffins to behave like that. Also with her was Zhao, whose father was the school principal. Because of this, they had to retreat, but they were in no hurry to leave the guy alone. At the same time, Zhang urged the young man to act more decisively, since he was not weak. But Z simply didn't want to cause them any trouble, so he always kept a low profile. As it turned out later, it was Lin who called them for help to prevent this outrage. Naturally, Fangu thanked her and told her that she shouldn't worry so much about him. In fact, Yuting was secretly in love with Zung and always tried to please him. At the same time, she was distinguished by her bloodthirstiness, despite her rather sweet and harmless appearance. Saying that these guys should burn in hell, Fangu hastened to reassure her because nothing had happened to him. Lin also said that he would soon collect the necessary amount of money to help his father and return to the BioShock game. Susu even offered to pay for his video game subscription so that he would go play with them. But Zung replied that he first needed to find a part-time job to pay for his father's treatment, and only after that will he be able to return to the fascinating virtual world. The girls were upset, but Yeyu's teacher noted that he was a strong guy and would succeed. Zhao stated that with his help, they would be able to advance further in the game and raise their level, to ultimately go to the bottom of the abyss and become much stronger. Moreover, Fang was no worse than Rebel, who topped the table of best players, who was literally the stuff of legends and considered the strongest. But Susu believed that Zung could surpass him. Thus, they decided to continue working hard in BioShock to become stronger by the time the boy returned. Sometime later, at night, Zung's mother called and told him that his father had refused the operation due to lack of funds. A stunned Fangu said that he needed to be persuaded, because tomorrow he would receive his salary and cover part of the expenses. Although the person responsible for the accident donated a small amount for treatment, it was not enough. The saddened boy understood that he needed to continue studying and working to help his father. Zung dreamed of the day when his business would improve and his father would finally recover. Looking at the virtual reality glasses, Fangu caught himself thinking that he missed the game and the guys. Soon, the young man finally went into the BioShock video game and began to look at his characters. Seeing his Rebel, he decided to remember the old days, because after his father's accident, the teenager did not appear in the game for more than 6 months. In the end, Zung chose him and went to familiar places. The character was at the final level of his development, which elevated him above the other players. At the same time, Fangu also decided to create a new warrior, since he carefully hid the Rebel from everyone, with which he was able to pass the test of the bottom of the abyss, which was an extremely difficult task, knowing full well that if the girls found out that he was the Rebel, they would clearly be angry. Suddenly, the guy noticed his email, where there was a new notification. Upon opening the message, Fang was asked to complete a challenge that would reward him with real money. A shocked Zeng realized that if this was really true, he would be able to pay for his father's treatment. What was the priority at the moment based on this? He agreed. As soon as the teenager confirmed his intention, he was enveloped by an unknown force. The stunned young man could not understand what was happening, while his real body was transferred into the game. What he couldn't even guess about was that he also had an extremely strange feeling, which he simply couldn't describe in words, suggesting that the developers had updated the game's perception. But when he looked at his reflection in the puddle, Fang was shocked, realizing that he was now a zombie. The system instantly alerted him that he needed to help the monsters in the wasteland, thereby going over to the side of evil. At that moment, a huge demon walked towards him, and the stunned Zeng immediately grabbed a chair in his hands. Looking at his extremely low stats, the protagonist was in despair. Meanwhile, people continued to confront the enraged mutants, whose numbers were becoming fewer and fewer. After they needed help, the program urged the young master to go into the wasteland. Zeng then decided to find out more information about the game's updates, as he had been absent for about 6 months. Moreover, this time the young man found himself on the other side of the barricades, being a representative of the monsters. But most importantly, Fangu had no way to leave the game until the human alliance was destroyed. The system also reported that after passing all the tests, he would return to his world at the time of leaving it. What fundamentally changed everything that was happening was that it was no longer a game, but real life. This meant that the virtual dimension had ceased to be such. Suddenly, Zeng received a notification about a new mission where he had to eliminate a level 30 marauder. The stunned Fangu could not understand how he could defeat him, because the teenager was much weaker than his opponent. The program also informed him that with each resurrection the demons would treat him better. However, if he was killed by another player, he would leave the game forever, which did not make Zeng particularly happy. Refusing the quest also removed the player from the game, so he had no choice but to take the risk to cure his father. Besides, Fang was an extremely experienced player, and the opportunity to play for the opposite race, but the system did not tell him exactly where to go to clear the area. It was also extremely strange that Zeng entered the game at the peak of online activity, but there were no other players nearby. He then came to the conclusion that this was part of the abyss that the developers had recently added. This meant that a high-level marauder should have been nearby, and since the abyss conceals many secret and dangerous passages, it was easy to get lost in it. And since the new alliance is trying to establish itself on the surface, the monsters mostly live in the underground world. Therefore, powerful marauders could be located at the entrance to the abyss pit in the city of BioShock. But the most important thing is that these demons had incredible damage, which even the best players of the game suffered. Because of this, Fang knew full well that he had to be extremely careful, especially with his low level. At that moment, he was attacked by monsters once again, from which Zeng began to run away with a chair in his hands. But at a certain time, everything around became quiet, and the teenager became wary, realizing that this was no accident. Turning around, he suddenly saw a huge dog approaching him. Along with him, a mutated and rather dangerous demoness was heading towards him. In addition to her limbs in the form of arms and legs, she had huge and long tentacles. A moment later, another no less dangerous mutated creature appeared on the battlefield. Fangu hid behind the wall, realizing that with the new update, the marauders and lurkers had acquired female forms. But he couldn't understand why they were fighting among themselves, since it was usually over territory. Suddenly, she pinned the poisonous monster to the ground. Zeng began to understand how dangerous the marauders were. She soon pierced her with her tentacles, which was a deadly attack. Thus, a clear winner was revealed after a couple of minutes of fighting. Fangu, in turn, began throwing stones at Marauder, trying to lure her towards him. Naturally, she noticed him and rushed towards the brave teenager, after which Zeng got on the scooter and headed forward along the road. The enraged demoness chased after him. As a result, he was unable to break away from her, since one of her steps stretched for several meters. At a certain moment, the guy turned around and saw a tentacle of a monster in front of him. The young man managed to steer to the side and thus drove the marauder into a trap, who stepped with all her weight onto the destroyed part of the road, thereby falling into the ground. In fact, Fangu remembered all the traps in the city, since he spent a lot of time exploring it on his main character. Suddenly, he was blinded by a bright light coming from the road. A couple of minutes later, a swarm of wasps attacked the marauder. The demoness was unable to do anything against them, because the insects had a huge amount of poison and instantly neutralized it. The main character only watched what was happening, because the wasps did all the work for him. Directing their poisonous sting at Marauder, they emitted toxic rays into her body. Naturally, the young master also understood that if it weren't for the scooter, he wouldn't have achieved such a result. However, the demoness suddenly seized the initiative in the fight with the insects. Killing the wasps one by one, she stood up to her full height and continued to resist. Soon she crawled out of the hole, but she only had a little health left. Fangu took advantage of this and released his dogs, who immediately rushed to finish off Marauder. Having mounted one of them, the young man grabbed a stool in his hands, realizing that this was an extremely important moment in the fight. Thus, the enraged dog began to deal crushing blows to the demoness, thus leaving her with only 1 unit of life, which is what the cunning Zung was aiming for. The teenager, in turn, hurried to finish off the half-dead Marauder. A couple of seconds later, Fangu jumped at her with a chair, but she tried to fight him off with her tentacles. However, she was unable to prevent the fatal blow, which was his luck again. The system immediately reported that the target was defeated, and he completed the mission to exterminate the monster, after which he thanked his faithful dog named Shiba Inu, saying that from now on, they would take care of each other. Zung knew that zombie dogs were friendly to mutated characters like him. The young man was indeed pursued by a series of extremely fortunate events, which he was only glad about. Suddenly, the program reported the successful completion of the task, thereby increasing Fang's characteristics. He also grew in size, but that was just the beginning, as the program rewarded him with many gifts. By paying 5,000 coins, Zung could literally control the Marauders, which came as a real surprise to him. But he was more concerned about the money. After all, 1 gold coin was equivalent to $1. The guy started counting. Suddenly, the program notified him that in the future he would be able to build his own base. Moreover, the system began forcibly teleporting the player to the City of Hope. A couple of minutes later, Fangu and his dog suddenly fell into a portal corridor. They soon made a very unfortunate landing, finding themselves in an unknown area. Looking around, the stunned teenager finally realized that they were in the City of Hope. The story goes that after the world was turned into a wasteland, the surviving people set up underground shelters. Scientists began creating a cure to make monsters intelligent, but demons destroyed the laboratory. At the moment, this place has become a hidden territory from everyone except Fangu. Even monsters and people could not enter the city. Zung looked around, wandering through abandoned places, realizing that this was now his new home. Suddenly, a slab in the ground opened up and a staircase appeared in front of him, and the system immediately announced another reward. As he walked down the steps, the teenager tried to figure out what the program had in store for him this time. Finally passing through the door, he discovered a secret abandoned laboratory, where in the middle of the room there was a capsule with water, into which an unknown girl was placed. The perplexed Fangu could not understand who she was and what she was doing in this container. At this time, Siyue was at home, where she was spending her weekends carefree. The girl took a shower with complete calm and went to her room, where she lay down on the bed and her gaze fell on the virtual reality glasses, she thought. Looking at a joint photo with her team, she realized how much she misses those times. In the end, Siyue decided to go to the BioShock video game, where her character was at level 24 and had good stats. Arriving in a huge futuristic metropolis, Z leisurely strolled through the city. Suddenly, she saw the very same establishment where they all spent time together. The girl really missed Zung, who hadn't appeared in the game for quite a long time. Memories of when they were actively playing BioShock came flooding back to her. Siyue also noted the variety of different foods that gave the players strength. At that moment, she received an invitation to try unique dishes from a certain game specialist. The girl thought, not understanding who it could be, since she also had not logged into the video game for a long time. In fact, it was a young master who wrote her a message from his laboratory. Besides, he knew perfectly well that this was the only way to lure her, because the girl never refused a snack. The main character did this for a reason, because he needed to awaken the stranger. Not long before this, Fangu asked the system how he could wake up the unknown person. The program notified that this required inviting a player into the game so that he could enter its body. She also warned that nothing would change in the real world, and that at the end, Zung's consciousness would return. After completing the last task, the guy will be able to go to his world before the transition to the game, adding that soon they would be able to create an entire army of mutants with the zombie girl. However, Fangu asked her not to be distracted and to focus on the game, since there were several missions to complete before that point. At the same time, Zung understood that food alone would not entice Siyue, so he decided to offer her a hidden profession, which yielded results. And C, to her surprise, accepted the request, as a result of which she was transferred into the body of a stranger. Soon the girl regained consciousness and began to look around. Fang immediately greeted her in the video game, and Siyue naturally paid attention to him, after which she suddenly rushed towards him. The stunned Zung could not understand what was happening. C suddenly began to strike him with furious blows as she saw a zombie in front of her. However, the guy turned out to be extremely agile and easily dodged all the furious attacks. This further angered the girl, who continued to attack the mutated youth. She was well aware that he was faster than her, but she wasn't going to give up. Believing that he had deliberately lured her into a trap and was clearly a danger, the teenager urged her to calm down, but this did not lead to anything, so he began to defend himself. Siwei continued to deliver crushing blows, but was still unable to injure him, which seemed to anger her even more. So it was simply impossible to stop the fight. The main character, in turn, did not stop demonstrating new abilities. The system immediately reported that the young master had the ability to transform, but since he was at the initial stage, his skills were limited. Eventually, Fangu pinned her to the glass capsule and urged her to look at her reflection. Finally turning around, C suddenly discovered that she had turned into a zombie. She was in shock. The guy smiled and said that she was now a member of the monster army. Siwei didn't understand how this happened. Zheng also added that they are at their base, established in the City of Hope. He then told her in detail about the situation they were in and what exactly needed to be done. Naturally, she got angry, and only after providing her with housing and food did Z calm down. Suddenly, the system asked him to make the girl wear one of the outfits provided to her. At the same time, Fangu was well aware that first of all, they needed to improve their skills, because they will have to confront a new alliance of people, which is an extremely dangerous and difficult mission. Having finally provided her with the necessary clothes, the girl happily agreed. After all, in addition to her appearance, she also increased her strength and certain characteristics. Zheng was pleased with this result and urged her to take the situation seriously. Suddenly, Siwei caught herself thinking that the NPC was acting extremely strangely, as if it had its own consciousness. After all, they even had a real feeling of hunger, something she had never observed before. Fangu, in turn, offered her a snack and prepared fried marauder tentacles, stating that her joining the team was definitely worth celebrating with a delicious lunch. The ever-hungry girl happily agreed to try the new dish and began to eat, but at the same time, she unexpectedly turned away from the guy. Zheng understood that this was an innate habit of a zombie, because a mutant, in a sense, like an animal, is a wild predator. After Z used the tentacles, some growths grew on her back, which soon turned into full-fledged tentacles, and its characteristics also increased. The dumbfounded Siwei couldn't understand what was happening. This action seemed extremely creepy to her. Then Fangu realized that zombified individuals were able to adopt the skills of the creatures they ate. The program only confirmed his suspicions by mentioning the food they must obtain in order to become stronger. Then the system sent them on a new mission. After lunch, Sei became much more active. After some time, they reached the intersection of the Thorn Forest and the City of Silence, where they were able to find a lot of low-level monsters to level up. Moreover, in this area there was a fairly high-calorie food source in the form of carrion. Thus, Zheng and Siwei plunged into the world of the dead, which was fascinating in its own way, where everything was run by some unknown person with his guards in the form of demons. But at the same time, everything was fine with the organizational aspects, since the zombie children received food every day. And at the same time, they took women captive to provide the babies with milk, which was also surprising. Moreover, one of them was a crazy researcher who conducted her experiments on the dead. Finally, it was Zheng's turn, and the teenager immediately tried the milk. The system instantly reported that his intelligence had increased as he had absorbed human flesh. Suddenly, an angry zombie leader approached him and asked what he was planning. He added that he had no right to be in line for milk, since he was not a child. Fangu rushed to settle the conflict, and she let him go, because she considered only other players as enemies. Suddenly, someone shouted that the Great Lady had arrived at their camp, after which the gates opened. 01 immediately walked through the main entrance riding on her huge beast. Others did not even pay attention to what was happening, continuing to consume human flesh. The rest of the mutants followed the demoness, and the protagonist asked the program why he couldn't see their level. The system replied that he could only see information from the original monsters. Zheng asked why they had the same numbers. The program then told about the secret laboratory where these creatures were created. But initially, scientists pursued the goal of suppressing mutations and eliminating their abnormal phenomena. However, the drugs had the exact opposite effect, and the demons became more aggressive. This was due to the zombie male virus, which contained huge amounts of superandrogens. And to facilitate further experiments, all subjects were numbered. Women in particular were subjected to various tests involving the introduction of toxins and the mixing of other monsters. Despite all the failures, scientists were still able to create a serum by chance. Soon, the test subjects were able to get rid of the virus, and their characteristics increased significantly. As a result, they came to the conclusion that there was no point in saving the infected, so they created a new alliance. As a result, man began to hunt monsters to obtain materials for the serum. At the same time, they wanted to exterminate all the demons to create a new Eden. But they did not know that the first test subjects had gained intelligence. The woman numbered C20 was the first to regain consciousness and even remembered some fragments of her life. And the guard, with angry hatred, forced her to suddenly evolve, and she turned into a real monster. After which, S20 persuaded her brothers, and they staged a riot in the laboratory. A person from the Alliance immediately arrived at the scene to resolve the issue. However, it was extremely difficult to deal with S20, as she was too strong. Subsequently, the man was eliminated, but the test subject continued to run amok in the laboratory. At the same time, the maddened woman ordered the killing of absolutely all people, and soon mountains of corpses filled the research center. But the survivors still managed to report the problem, and the Alliance decided to block the escape routes and blow up the city. Since then, no one has ever seen S20 again. There were rumors that she and several test subjects managed to escape. Fangu understood perfectly well that in reality, the most dangerous creature in the current world is man. He also realized that only the demons from the laboratory could cultivate. Suddenly, 01 asked Zung why he was smiling and what made him laugh so much. At the same time, she asked if he was a plant from the Alliance. At this moment, Siwei suddenly struck her with her long tentacle, trying to protect Fang. By making it clear that she was not allowed to touch him, 01 was amazed by her bravery. While she stated that mutants rarely act as a team, she stood her ground. Claiming that the guy was up to no good, she suddenly called out to Lei Ying. The girl immediately said that under her sensitive guidance, the demons began to evolve faster. Then 01 suggested that she organize survival training. The young man, in turn, was impressed by the work of Z, who was always ready to help in difficult times. He also asked the stranger about training. The teenager said that zombies are divided into groups and must live in the thorn forest. In this way, they proved their skills to stay in the camp. But the monsters in the forest were extremely dangerous. Le, in turn, asked the ruler to give the mutants time to practice well, since last time few survived. The business lady asked if she had really decided to teach her, and naturally, Ying immediately began to deny it. Then 01 declared that all demons must increase their power as quickly as possible. At this time, the ghost sniper took advantage of the moment and scanned the area of the zombified. But it didn't bring any results. The only thing he saw was Chin tied up. The captain later stated that he was unable to find out anything because the mutants had become much smarter. Bloodthirsty Electroblade replied that they were indeed evolving rapidly now, and her squad should prepare. The sniper objected to her, saying that his team was no worse than hers at handling this matter. The girl immediately grabbed her sword, hinting that she would be happy to calm him down, adding that the new people, after entering the game dimension, never tested their strength. Iron Man was quick to reassure them, saying that they should be fighting monsters, not each other. The lone warrior agreed with him, saying that they needed to focus on the problem. Everyone immediately fell silent, because no one dared to contradict the head of the new alliance. He also urged them not to forget about the ultimate goal, which was to conquer this world. Meanwhile, Fang and Siwei continued to be in the zombified camp. The protagonist knew that the phantom sniper could see from a distance, and that the captured woman was a player. It was unclear why Chin did not exit the game, since she had already been in captivity for several days. In any case, the young master intended to take advantage of the situation. After 01 left, the animal bodies were taken to another location, meaning the free food ended. Lei began to tell everyone about the rules of survival training to warn them against a quick death. It was necessary to spend a month in the forest. Initially, Ying urged everyone to learn how to hide, and then hunting skills. At the same time, she recommended not to attract a huge number of monsters, and under no circumstances to go into the center of the forest. Fang and Z immediately went into the forest, but they were never told how exactly to kill the monsters. Suddenly, the same boy who told us about the training emerged from the bushes. He stated that it was very difficult and only a few zombies would return alive. He also finally introduced himself, calling himself Li Baba, and noted that he was involved in martial arts. The young man immediately began to try to join their team, but Zung refused to accept him. Since he understood that Li would only slow down their progress, he needed to be provided with food. Suddenly, Baba smiled and said that he knew what he was worried about. Having started to assure that he had a unique ability, at that moment he suddenly turned to stone. Fang began to understand that with such a skill, their defensive and offensive tactics would be more balanced. As a result, he welcomed the new team member and told Li to coordinate all his actions with him. Wandering through the forest, Baba began to ask their names, but Zung declared that it was not important. At this time, Hui was walking with the girls at the edge of the forest, clearly confident in his abilities. Suddenly, they were attacked by Flower Toad, who began to deal with them. From experience, Fangu knew very well that dangerous animals always roam the outskirts of the forest, and only those who were there for the first time did not know all the nuances of this territory. As a result, they very quickly became food for such monsters. Therefore, it was necessary to always remain in the shadows and be extremely careful. Unexpectedly, Z stole the monster's egg as well, and a shocked Zung called on her to return it immediately. But Siwei had no intention of doing this, after which they entered the third sector of the forest, where it was relatively safe. Since the 4th and 5th districts were inhabited by high-level demons, the Thorn King was also there. As the night got late, they decided to get some sleep and climbed into the trees. The next day, Zung's team attempted to capture several low-level monsters. which overall, they did quite well, with each demonstrating their abilities. The system immediately rewarded them with 1,000 coins, and they cooked food from the killed mutants. Having had a good meal, Fangu offered to defeat a stronger opponent, and after a certain amount of time, they managed to deal with the zombified monkey, for which they also received several hundred coins and another meal to acquire positive effects. At night, they hid again and began to eat, since after sunset the demons became more active. Baba noted Zung's incredible cooking ability, as he was truly knowledgeable about cooking. Thus, they evolved and became much stronger, which only benefited them in such a dangerous place. Li, to his surprise, also began to demonstrate his high speed and his crushing strength, something that even Fangu didn't expect, because the progress was quite fast. Naturally, Zung's strength also increased, and after a difficult day, they took refuge in a cave. Gradually, the number of gold coins increased, but the boy couldn't understand why the system began to hide his characteristics. The program informed him that there was no point in this, and that he would no longer need it. After all, the most important thing is to develop your unique abilities to become stronger. Noticing a mutated mosquito on the horizon, Fangu rushed to deal with it. Subsequently, he discovered a new skill in the form of mental transformation, as well as elasticity. The teenager couldn't understand why he needed it, and suddenly the system disturbed him again. This time she gave him a solo mission, where he had to eliminate a tiger. Of course, the self-confident Zing went in search of the animal, especially since he was eager to test his new skills. Soon the young man came across an unknown cave from which magma began to flow. The main character had encountered it before, but this time the beast was much larger. Assuming that he had also evolved, the young master instantly rushed towards him, after which Fangu began to deliver his crushing blows with his sharp tentacles. Zung's attacks seemed to do no damage to the mutant, which was surprising. Then the boy began to think about how he could pierce the tiger's thick skin. The monster itself, for some unknown reason, was in no hurry to attack, which also raised questions. The young man continued to deliver a series of furious blows but was unable to harm him. Suddenly, the tiger rushed towards him. Fangu did not stop pressing on him, believing that the best way is to simply wear the animal out and then finish it off. At a certain point, Zung managed to dodge the attack and attack the beast. As a result, he inflicted a deep wound on him, and the tiger almost lost his paw. However, after a couple of seconds, the demon easily regenerated, and subsequently his limb became covered with flesh again. In addition, the monster went berserk, which gave him a lot of strength and health. In addition, his attacks became much faster and he became completely covered in flames. But even from such a situation, Fangu was able to get out of it by using his tentacles as a shield. At that moment, it dawned on him what was meant by the elasticity skill. A moment later, Zung literally turned his limb into a cannon and fired at the beast. The sphere instantly flew into the body of the enraged animal, which he did not expect at all. Thus, he defeated the mutant, and the reward from the system was, in turn, quite generous. At the same time, Fangu was exhausted because he had lost a lot of strength in the battle with such a strong monster. The teenager breathed a sigh of relief and immediately headed towards the exit of the animal's den. But suddenly an earthquake began, and Zung was stunned and did not understand what was happening. A couple of minutes later, 3 huge tigers approached him and asked if the baby had killed their brother. Adding that they were obliged to avenge his death, the young man immediately backed away, after which he transformed his tentacles into a cannon. But this time he began to emit fiery projectiles. By releasing several fire spheres, he managed to seriously injure the golden tiger. The others were perplexed, not understanding where this boy got such strength from. Soon everything around was on fire, and the stunned animals began to retreat. Taking advantage of the moment, Fangu literally burned the wounded beast alive. At the same time, he was extremely curious about how much money the system would give out for killing such dangerous demons. The tigers, in turn, could do nothing to resist the teenager, plunging into the fiery abyss. Meanwhile, in the lair of the zombified, T02 was gradually coming to her senses. The protagonist continued to demonstrate his unique abilities to the demons. The beasts continued to attack the young master, who had once again prepared a trap for them. They fell for it without thinking, which was exactly what Zung wanted, since they could only be defeated by cunning. Having erected a magical barrier with his tentacles, Fangu immediately ran back. Having destroyed it, they did not find the teenager and began to look around. A couple of seconds later, the ground beneath them collapsed into a fiery abyss. The monsters didn't have time to react. As a result, the guy easily burned them. The system instantly rewarded him with 10,000 gold. A whole month has passed since then, and few people have returned to the zombie camp, which was to be expected. Extremely concerned about this outcome, Lee wondered if there were any survivors. 01 said that she was counting on having a baby with her cheeky friend. However, they also did not appear on the horizon, which is why the leader became upset. At that moment, T02 suddenly woke up and stated that she felt someone approaching them from the forest. A puzzled Ying asked if they were mutants, and the demoness answered in the affirmative. However, she noted that the zombified cannot breathe so intensely. 01 understood that Xiao couldn't be wrong because she had a well-developed perception. But what exactly had frightened her so much remained a mystery to her. So they began to wait for the uninvited guests. Suddenly, T09 pointed to the forest and said that there was some movement coming from the grove. A moment later, they heard explosions and saw some kind of magical glow. A few seconds later, monsters appeared, led by the Thorn King, who had mutated into a dragon. At the same time, they were walking to a certain place. This phenomenon was quite strange. 01 immediately saw that same guy with the girl and smiled, saying that they were accompanying the new king. Fangu and his team were riding on a dragon, which they never expected. Wondering how they managed to achieve such a result, everyone was simply shocked by such an incredible outcome because no one had seen the Thorn King before. 01 noted that she definitely liked this brave and extremely capable boy, because in just 1 month he had ridden the main monster of the forest, something no one had ever managed to do before. She instantly rushed towards him and his dragon pet to greet him. The perplexed Baba asked the teenager why the lady was flying to them. In connection with this, Lee decided to demonstrate his skills to her and suddenly attacked her. Naturally, 01 was prepared for such a scenario and dodged the blow. He said that he had become much stronger, but it was not enough to resist her, after which the lady attacked him from behind, adding that he had a lot to learn. Baba fell to the ground with a crash, realizing how strong the demoness was. Siwei immediately rushed towards her with her long tentacles, which 01 was also prepared for. But Si was absolutely confident in herself and acted accordingly, which surprised the lady. The demoness noted that she was much stronger and faster than Baba. But this was also not enough for victory. Siwei, in turn, ignored all of her statements, thinking only of revenge. At a certain moment, the girl emitted magical rays from her tentacles. However, 01 managed to cover herself with her wings, but still fell to the ground. Having thus turned into a cocoon, Si finally calmed down, thinking that she had won. But she was extremely curious to open the demoness's shell, so Siwei tried to open it. Suddenly, 01 flapped her wings and rushed towards the self-confident person again. Everything happened so quickly that Sei didn't have time to understand anything and simply froze in place. The lady took advantage of this and suddenly used a soporific hypnosis on her. Siwei instantly fell into a deep sleep. The demoness remarked that she lacked tactics. After 01 headed towards the protagonist, Zeng prepared for battle. The business lady asked him if he had been waiting for her for too long, but the young master remained silent. She also stated that she did not harm his friends and simply put them to sleep for a while, so that no one could interfere with them. Fang knew that she was indeed strong enough. But at the same time, the teenager encouraged her to demonstrate all her abilities and not hold back. Then 01 suggested that he change location, and Zeng happily agreed. The stunned subordinates of the mistress could not believe what was happening. Soon, Fangu and the demoness began to fight each other in the sky, which looked extremely spectacular. However, they then moved on to land combat, where they also began to demonstrate their skills. At a certain point, 01 smiled and said that the training was over. Since they were about to have a real fight, the self-confident Zeng was only glad about it. The lady used her magical abilities liberally, but this did not frighten the guy at all. The battle actually escalated into a deadly confrontation, resulting in an explosion. The forest inhabitants hurried to leave the area as everything went up in flames. The teenager demonstrated incredible strength, something that 01 never expected from him. Having blocked all of her attacks, the young man easily carried out his own series of strikes, after which the bewildered demoness flew to the side and landed extremely painfully. Fangu approached her and declared that he would not obey her, rather the opposite, that she would have to carry out his orders. Suddenly, his body underwent a transformation, and the stunned 01 did not understand where such strength came from. In the end, Zeng acquired the dragon armor, declaring that she would now feel his power, after which he unleashed a barrage of incredible attacks on her. The lady immediately retreated back, but Fangu continued to attack, thus not giving her the opportunity to leave the battlefield. The demoness understood perfectly well that she could not cope with him, since the power of the Thorn King had awakened within him. The wounded 01 asked the teenager how he had acquired these skills. She soon accepted her defeat, even though it was hard for her to come to terms with it. Suddenly, Zeng turned into a human and said that she would become stronger in the future, but not now. He also called on her to obey him, calling himself her commander, and 01 immediately lowered her sad eyes. Then she nervously asked how he managed to achieve such an unimaginable result. Fang smiled and noted that he had only used a tenth of his strength. Besides, she wouldn't be able to activate her camouflage for a while. The demoness was terrified. Surprised, she asked how he knew about her secret, but the guy did not answer her. At this point, it suddenly dawned on her that he was actually a human disguised as a zombie. Meanwhile, Qin, who was held captive by the mutants, continued to suffer from extreme pain. 01 suddenly found herself drawn into her memories. where Lin handed over the reins of power to her. The girl literally begged her not to leave, but C20 made her final decision, having said that she needed to finish her business and that she was obliged to lead the mutants. The demoness began to understand that with a leader like this man, they would have a chance of salvation. In this regard, she asked the young master to become their leader. Zung smiled. Then he said that from today on, they would all begin to live a full life. Then the inquisitive 01 asked how he managed to defeat the Thorn King. The protagonist understood that he couldn't tell her about the system, which had once again given him a difficult task. After defeating the tigers, the program rewarded him with several black boxes, after which she sent him on an incredibly difficult mission to eliminate the dominant dragon. Fang was very lucky because 6 clones fell out of the boxes, which naturally affected the current situation, because now it really did seem possible to defeat the Thorn King. After all, Zung couldn't cope with him alone, so the gifts of the system came in handy. Thus, the teenager's strength increased 6-fold, which had a positive effect on the battle with the monster, which was sprayed onto the Fang clones. They acted as one well-coordinated mechanism. Besides this, Baba and Siuwei also did not sit still and distracted the Thorn King. And at the most crucial moment, when the dragon weakened and tried to hide, it was necessary to strike the decisive blow. However, the clone's time was up, and Li suddenly suggested using one effective tactic. Zung grabbed his legs with his tentacles, and Baba himself folded his hands in such a way that he became a hammer, which Fangu began to strike furious blows with, having first filled it with magical energy. What became the decisive moment for the King of Thorns? He simply could not do anything. Ultimately, they managed to defeat the dragon, and he fell to the ground unconscious. When he came to, Zung asked him for help to deal with the human alliance. But the teenager told 01 that the Thorn King just liked him, and now they are friends. At this time, Lao was feeding his friend Xiao Carrion, having previously hidden from the angry people. But their meal did not last long, because the alliance soon caught up with them. They subsequently shot the thug, but Liu managed to escape, realizing that he would never see his friend again, after which they began to eliminate the remaining monsters, of which there were quite a few. But most of the mutants were eliminated by the alliance forces, as they were well trained. At that moment, several high-ranking monsters suddenly awakened and grabbed a couple of girls. Wang was furious and intended to avenge the death of his younger comrade. He soon satisfied his hunger, but there was still one representative of the New Eden left. Naturally, the demon was in a hurry to deal with her, but she turned out to be quite nimble. Dodging all of the monster's attacks, the girl waited for the right moment to deliver a crushing blow. The difficulty was that the technological weapon did not harm the mutant in any way. Then the warrior began to activate the new ability, hoping that it would help her. Then she began to dodge the demon's long arms again, waiting for the right moment. Her speed increased several times, and the monster simply could not keep up with her. Eventually, it paid off and she was able to take down the big guy. After she found Chin tied up, the doctor asked who was there. Having learned that it was Storm, she asked to be released quickly, but the girl refused to do so. Because she was carrying a zombie and therefore had to die, the stunned Chin asked to listen to her. However, at that moment, someone attacked Storm from behind and thereby cut off her arm. Fangu, in turn, hurried with his charges to the lair of the Alliance of New People. Shocked, Storm did not expect such a turn of events and screamed loudly in unbearable pain. As it turned out, Baba arrived just in time, saying that the first thing people needed to do was cut off their hands. Then they began to fight. Li did not expect that the girl would be so nimble. The warrior immediately used her abilities and released a whirlwind towards the guy, but Baba managed to free himself and deliver a powerful blow with his stone fist. The Storm was unable to do anything against him and found itself in an extremely dire situation. Subsequently, Li fed her to his powerful beast, who did not stand on ceremony with her, after which he headed towards Chin, declaring that because of her, a huge number of his brothers had died. The main character suddenly appeared and called on Baba to retreat to the base and await his orders. Having added that he would personally take care of this girl, the young master then released her. She tearfully asked for only one thing, that he kill her quickly and without suffering. But Zung said that even if he killed her, she would be resurrected again. The shocked doctor asked how he knew about the existence of other players. Realizing that he really understands this game world more than anyone else, Fangu wondered if the other players had received the same quest, why they hadn't been reborn as zombies like him. Suddenly, he asked her how she got her belly. Chin replied that one person was to blame for everything, and she told her story of what happened when she was a graduate student in the bioengineering department, but she never managed to defend her diploma and was unable to complete her studies. Then Chin was bored at home for a long time, and to somehow distract herself from her problems, she began to play BioShock with her friends. She soon met a guy named Thunderclap in a video game, after which they became friends and constantly played together. But one day, he once again invited her to play. They spent a lot of time and became closer to each other. The girl really fell in love with him. Then the young man asked her to create a serum for the alliance of new people to give them superpowers. And since the equipment in the game was much more advanced than real equipment, her research bore fruit. However, passing by his room, she saw a teenager with another girl, at which time Chin was already pregnant by him. Then, Thunderclap deliberately threw it to the monsters during one of the missions. He originally wanted her to be seen by the Ghost Eye squad, but she had a blindfold on. And in order to hide his crimes, the guy sent an assassin. At that moment, Chin suddenly burst into tears. Then Fangu offered her to take revenge on him, or die here and now. The girl thought about it, after which she angrily screamed through tears that she dreamed of revenge. The mutants soon went deeper into the forest, where Zung stated that the Alliance had discovered their location and that it was no longer safe. Opening the portal, he called on everyone to follow him to the City of Hope, where people would not immediately find them, adding that by the time they arrived, they were obliged to rebuild the fortress in order to withstand them. Naturally, everyone admired the new head of the zombies, and Fang himself ordered 01 to bring as many monsters as possible. At the same time, it was necessary to train them in everything necessary to fight the Alliance. Meanwhile, Zung's pet confessed his love to Siyue, whom he began to lick from head to toe. The guy approached him and asked if he had completed the mission assigned to him. The dog barked loudly, which was a positive answer. Fangu smiled and stroked the dog. A moment later, a whole pack of mutated dogs rushed towards them, which Zung was only glad about. Having said that Shiba Inu had completed the task, they should now hurry with the construction of the fortress. A whole month passed and Zung was literally exhausted because he had not slept a single night during this time. Suddenly, the system gave him another mission, which required him to go to the mechanical city to activate the cyborgs. The program specified that it also needed to call the player to enter the body of the cyborg, who was in the warehouse. When Fangu went to the lab, he found a robot in the capsule and wondered who would be best suited for this role. Suddenly, Siyue followed him into the room, and Zung urged her to return to the camp. But the girl said that she was very hungry and wanted to eat, and the teenager sighed heavily. The extremely persistent C kept asking him to cook something. But Fang's head was filled with something completely different, because he needed to find a suitable person for the cyborg. It suddenly dawned on him that Zhao, who hadn't appeared in the game for a long time, would be perfect for this role. The protagonist continued to think that this was a great idea, but Siyue constantly reminded him of her hunger. When she called him by name, the stunned young master asked how Z knew it was him. The girl then showed him the system's information window, which indicated his name and status. Zung, in turn, understood that sooner or later she would have figured it out anyway. The program clarified that after joining a team, all squad members see detailed information about it. Fangu thought for a moment, realizing that in that case he would need to choose a person he could trust. And since the teenager had few friends, the number of options was limited. The young man decided to ask Siyue who he should invite to the game. Teacher Jiang or Yuting and Susu. At that moment, Si began to eat and said that it would be best to stock up on meat. Realizing that there was no hope for her, the guy continued to think. He soon returned to Zhao's candidacy, especially since her family was designing intelligent robots. Moreover, she herself took direct part in this. But recently her company was in crisis. In the end, Zung decided to invite her to help her. Late at night, the girl was in her room, where she was resting peacefully. She woke up unexpectedly because she heard the sound of a message in the BioShock video game. Curiosity got the better of her, and she put on the virtual reality glasses and became immersed in the game. Finding herself inside a fascinating world, she again remembered Fang, with whom she had played together for a long time. Finally opening the notification, she was surprised to find that it was Zung asking for her help. At the same time, he promised her to master a new profession as a cyborg, which was also extremely interesting to her. Realizing that he really needed her help, of course, she agreed. As soon as she accepted his invitation, the girl was instantly transported to another place. Soon, Susu entered the cyborg's body, and a stunned Fangu silently watched what was happening. The teleportation was successful, as reported by the system, which made Zung extremely pleased. Finding herself in another body, a surprised Zhao asked if this was really a game, because everything indicated that she had entered a distorted reality where technology was at the highest level. Suddenly, Zung greeted her, with Siyue standing next to him, no less surprised. However, like Si, Susu mistook him for an enemy because the guy looked like he was zombified. He started asking if he really was Fangu, since mutants can't talk. The young man began to understand that it would be quite difficult to tell her everything, so that she would believe him. Zhao, in turn, demanded that they immediately give her Zung, adding that if they didn't do it right away, she would force them to do it herself. Seeing the girl's mood, the protagonist understood that at the moment he would not be able to explain anything to her. As a result, a fight broke out between them, and the young master began to defend himself. Susu quickly realized that the monster was not so simple and that she had to be extremely careful with it, but at that moment, Siyue grabbed her with her tentacles, literally freezing her in her tracks. Zhao simply couldn't do anything, knowing that now she wouldn't be able to free Fang. Then C asked her friend to look at the panel where their names were written. The stunned girl looked at the pop-up window above the boy's head and finally realized that it was true. Soon, Siwei let her go, once again assuring her that they were indeed her friends. Susu also synchronized the cyborg's memories and learned about their main goal. Based on this information, Zhao was able to lead them to the City of Hope's secret warehouse. Where were the cyborgs and cores located? Pointing to an underground shelter under the city. Entering the elevator, he instantly fell down, and the temperature suddenly began to rise. Fangu immediately spread his mighty wings and called the girls to cling to him. Subsequently, they curled up into a cocoon to avoid exposure to high temperatures. This dome kept them safe, but at the same time it was very hot inside. As soon as the elevator stopped, the temperature also returned to normal, which was quite strange. Suddenly the doors opened and water poured down on them. Zeng assumed they had been thrown into the open sea. Susu swam first, and the rest followed her, rushing into the unknown abyss, at the bottom of which were the ruins of an entire city. It was a truly impressive picture. Unexpectedly, Fangu noticed the local inhabitants of the water dimension. They looked like mermaids, but the creatures did not try to attack them. On the contrary, they seemed extremely friendly, and the guy immediately swam up to the amazing monsters. But suddenly a less friendly person appeared and rushed towards Zeng. Fangu had foreseen this predictable outcome and was ready for battle. The young man instantly pierced her with his tentacles, which was quite expected. At that moment, the rest of the extremely aggressive mermaids swam up to them. But for Fangu's team, this was not a problem even underwater, where movements were significantly slower. Zhao, in turn, demonstrated incredible abilities. She quickly mastered the role of a cyborg. Siwei was not inferior to her in strength, and was also skilled in dealing with a huge number of sea creatures. But at a certain point, for unknown reasons, the mermaids stopped. Then they rushed in different directions, which indicated the approach of a larger fish. A couple of seconds later, a mutated shark headed towards them, scaring everyone with its terrifying appearance. Zeng and the girls managed to hide behind the ruins of a building on the ocean floor, when suddenly an even larger monster grabbed the shark. As it turned out later, it was a titanic octopus of incredible size, which, having opened its enormous mouth, began to suck in all living things. After some time, they found themselves in the mutant's stomach and began to look around, trying to figure out how to get out of here and what to do at all. Suddenly, they discovered a certain structure, where, according to Susu, the core and a legion of cyborgs were located. The protagonist could not understand how the entire ghost town could end up in this monster. After passing through long pipes, they suddenly came to an area where broken cyborgs lay. Zhao noted that due to the colossal losses, their maintenance became impossible and they were put into hibernation mode. In connection with this, they hurried to move on so as not to wake the robots. Soon they came to a strange door with holes, and a puzzled Zeng asked Susu what it was. The girl stated that, according to her archival data, the city had undergone significant changes. A surprised Fangu asked if the city could really mutate, although it was logical since it was in the stomach of a monster. In order to find the energy core, they decided to split up, and they set off to look for him, while they could always contact each other using the Allies panel. Because each of them could get into trouble since this location was unknown to them. After walking through several corridors, the young master found himself in the legendary ghost ruins. But suddenly someone attacked him. Zeng managed to dodge the attack and jump to the side. The unknown robot couldn't understand what this monster was doing here and why it was so fast. Declaring that he would feed his kraken with this self-confident upstart anyway, the system immediately gave Fang a new task: to capture the leader of the cyborgs. Meanwhile, Siwei passed through several pipes and once again found herself in the open sea, where there were many piranhas who immediately rushed towards her to feast. The girl didn't know what to do or how to get out of this situation, because the number of fish was increasing with each passing second, and she simply had nowhere to go to escape. But at that moment, C felt hunger, causing her fear to instantly disappear, and she turned into a bloodthirsty killer. Thus, she easily dealt with a huge number of piranhas, after which she began to consume them with absolute calm, and even built a raft on which she lit a small fire. However, at this time, a large fish rushed towards her, intending to take revenge on her for the murder of her fellow fish. But after interrupting Siwei's meal, she herself did not know what she had signed up for, and the girl became furious. She wasn't even intimidated by the size of the piranha, which continued to head towards her. On the contrary, C was only glad of such a portion of lunch, since the other fish were small, and she clearly was not full. Susu, in turn, continued to wander through the long corridors of the ghost city in search of the core. Suddenly, her radar detected an approaching signal, and Zhao realized that the cyborg center was very close. But someone activated a laser barrier, which rushed towards the girl. As a result, she used mechanical bifurcation and immediately fell apart. with the help of which she was able to pass through this network of blasters and thus overcome the obstacle. Susu then reunited again and continued on to the robot center to find the core. Zhao was amazed by the technology in the virtual world, realizing how useful it would be in her real life. Finally reaching the door, she tried to pick the lock to get inside. Entering the laboratory, the girl discovered several capsules with cyborgs. Naturally, Susu hastened to activate the semi-cybernetic legion. Suddenly, the room began to fill with smoke. Zhao couldn't understand what was happening. At that moment, a huge cyborg rushed towards her, who decided to prevent the activation of the robots. The girl couldn't understand why he was attacking an ally because everything should have been different. The robot continued to pursue her, with the aim of eliminating her. Susu continued to dodge the attacks. I caught myself thinking that this half-cyborg is extremely stupid, because the symbiosis of the machine and the brain behaves differently. Zhao immediately activated a magical barrier to block the enemy's missiles. By that time, she had filled her mechanical body with energy, and this was enough for the battle. Susu understood that now she could take the initiative and defeat the enraged robot. But the stubborn half-cyborg did not give up on the thought of destroying her and used various weapons. The girl also decided to activate the opponent's movement prediction mode. Finally understanding how he would act, Zhao was able to easily disarm him. She then proceeded to immobilize him in order to finish off the guard completely. As a result, the half-cyborg collapsed to the ground, unable to continue the fight. Susu understood that the first thing she needed to do was reconfigure it and reboot the system. She also discovered that he was actually acting on orders from an unknown person. After collecting it piece by piece, Zhao programmed it in the right way so that it would no longer pose a threat to the cyborgs. Having come to his senses, the puzzled robot asked why he was outside the sleep capsule. The girl explained to him that he had been forced to carry out criminal orders and asked him to tell her what had happened. Suddenly, he leaned towards her and began to examine her, then asked a counter question, whether she really was a prototype. But Susu didn't understand what he was talking about, so the half-cyborg told her the story of what happened. When Dr. Guanya was in charge of the Artificial Robotics Center, he was a leading expert in this field. To help humans build the City of Hope, he used cyborgs to transport energy cores. Soon they improved and even began to guard the city. And this is how this legion of machines appeared. But then they were exiled because the Alliance didn't want the technology to go to the monsters. And the most advanced developments of the semi-cyborgs were embodied in the prototype, and since new technologies were tested on it, the machine absorbed the entire arsenal of research. However, after the end of the rebellion, the prototype disappeared and thus separated from the Robot Legion. Guanya, in turn, introduced a protective protocol into the remaining half-cyborgs, which is why he attacked her. But it was unclear how the doctor who created them was able to load them with such programs. Zhao then decided to find this man and ask him personally. But at that moment, Susu's path was blocked by more ill-wishers made of steel. The robot noted that when the Legion was exiled, a protective protocol was implanted into several hundred cyborgs. This meant only one thing: they could burst into the laboratory at any moment. However, a robotic girl suddenly appeared and began to destroy the half-cyborgs. She easily dealt with a huge number of robots. Stating that she came to protect the prototype, she called her chief, adding that the female Titan squad is a special unit created to protect her. There were 9 of them in total, and they obeyed only her, since that was how Guanya programmed them. A puzzled Susu asked if she was really created to protect her. The half-cyborg corrected her, saying that it was more likely to follow her. Then she asked for help in one matter. Meanwhile, Fangu continued to fight with the leader of the machines. But no matter how much he tried to break through the defense, he couldn't do it. What raised questions was that Zeng couldn't understand why the octopus's tentacles were so elastic. At the same time, they completely neutralized his attacks, which made the task much more difficult. The guy began to think about what tricks he would need to resort to in order to deal with him. Siyue, in turn, was frying a huge piranha, anticipating its delicious meat. Finally, having eaten her fill, Z continued to look for a way back to the ghost town, because she understood perfectly well that her friends clearly needed help. Having found the pipe, the girl rushed to swim along it and jumped into an unknown vat of water. Siyue guessed that there might also be piranhas here, as there were always a lot of them. Suddenly, a water whirlwind began to approach her, and C began to swim back. At that moment, a huge royal piranha appeared, which is what the girl expected. The main character, in turn, continued to try to deal with the cyborg. The thunderclap sent a shock through his entire body, which only seemed to amuse the robot. The young master looked at him in bewilderment and realized that he was able to absorb electricity. He just laughed in response and said that his body had electric eel genes embedded in it, and Zeng's lightning only made him stronger. Then Fangu began to emit flames, intending to burn him to the ground, but this also did not bring any results. Everything around burst into flames, but the head of the half-cyborgs remained completely unharmed. The stunned guy didn't know how to act against him and began to think, not understanding how this was even possible, since having resistance to several elements was beyond the pale. The smiling robot said that he was also not afraid of high temperatures. At the same time, he tried to understand where such incredible strength and skills came from in such a zombie. He added that if the young man left him alone and did not interfere, he would have mercy on him and let him go. Naturally, the teenager objected to him, saying that he needed an energy core, and without it he would not go anywhere. The robot was surprised, stating that he could not give it to him and that there was no talk of it. Zung, in turn, hastened to convince him otherwise with the help of his new ability, after which he began to deliver crushing blows to the body of the extremely self-confident creature. Which finally worked, and the cyborg actually felt pain, which surprised him greatly. Fangu understood exactly how to act against such an enemy, who couldn't comprehend what was happening, because a series of furious zombie attacks actually caused him significant damage. As a result, Zung rushed to unleash another barrage of powerful blows on him. The puzzled half-cyborg continued to wonder why the boy had so many different techniques. At that moment, Fangu transformed his tentacles into a huge hammer to end the battle. But suddenly Susu appeared and immediately released her chain. Having tied Zung's mace with it, she called on him to calm down, and the teenager was surprised. Zhao once again demanded that her partner not touch Dr. Guan, who couldn't believe that the first model of a semi-cyborg was in front of him. Then the girl asked him what actually happened after the expulsion. The doctor began to tell the story of the mutiny and the actions that followed it. With great sadness, the captain informed him that all cyborgs needed to be exiled to prevent monsters from taking over their technology. Of course, he had to agree since people promised to treat his zombified daughter. He later deeply regretted this, but time had been lost and nothing could be changed. Therefore, Guanya decided to personally lead this operation to ensure a safe outcome for all robots. The prototype was immediately sent to the Alliance base for further disassembly. However, this water area turned out to be a place of exile for him and the other cyborgs. Eventually, the monstrous octopus swallowed their station, and when Guanya woke up, he saw a horrifying scene. But on the other hand, this was precisely the chance for survival, which he took advantage of. Soon, the doctor transformed himself into a semi-cyborg and directly connected with the heart of the mutated monster. He put a legion of robots into hibernation, having first implanted a protective protocol into them. And since people could not penetrate him, thus, he negotiated the opportunity to treat his daughter. But now it was unknown what her fate would be. And the appearance of an incredible zombie and a prototype on the same day completely contradicts science. Then the protagonist asked if he wanted to leave this place to see his daughter. Naturally, Guanya answered positively, but he did not know how to separate from the octopus. Unexpectedly, Zhao, who was confident, volunteered to help, claiming she knew how to do it. He added that it was first necessary to separate the core tissue and isolate the energy core, and then connect the mechanical prostheses. Soon, she actually succeeded in doing this, which the doctor never expected from a half-cyborg. After the operation was completed, Guanya jumped up from his seat and began to examine himself, not believing that she had succeeded. Susu also downloaded all the historical data into it so that it would be aware of the latest events, including information about his daughter, whom the professor had not seen for so many years. After looking through the available data on Xiaofei, the old man almost burst into tears, realizing that everything was fine with her. But the fact that the new people of the Alliance deceived him made the doctor angry. He was furious. Fangu told him that they had established themselves in the City of Hope in order to deal a crushing blow to the people. Guanya asked if they really wanted to get the power core to activate the Legion of Half-Cyborgs. Zung answered positively. Then the professor asked for one request. The teenager said he would do everything possible, and the doctor immediately approached him and whispered something in his ear. Naturally, this did not please Susu, who stood to the side and tried to understand what they were talking about. Late at night, they finally began to implement their plan. Amidst the ruins of a sunken city, a huge mutated octopus suddenly swam out. Soon he took them to one of the destroyed buildings, saying that this was where they would have to say goodbye. A puzzled Zhao asked why he didn't want to go with them to see Fei. Guanya replied that he would definitely do so. But later, because he had one unfinished business left, after which he once again approached Zung and asked him to take care of Xiao, adding that the guy should remember his promise. Of course, Fangu had no intention of deceiving him. He also wished them luck in the battle with the new alliance, as they had to pay for their crimes. Thus, they managed to retrieve and deliver the energy core to the City of Hope. Having placed it on the appropriate setting, the mechanism immediately came into action. A magical light illuminated the entire city. It was an incredibly beautiful sight. The system immediately rewarded Zung with 20,000 gold and 2 black boxes. Fangu then asked the program to transfer the money into the real world, which turned out to be very simple. Where in the weapons and various skills store, you just had to enter the card number. Having looked through the entire assortment, the young man began to understand that he would have to save up gold for a long time. Thus, he easily transferred part of the money for his father's operation, then asked the system for a new task. The program unexpectedly offered him to bring a new player into the world of BioShock as the Beetle Queen. The teenager again began to think about who he could ask for this request. But at that moment, he remembered with horror that he had completely forgotten about Siwei, who was at the station. Meanwhile, Guanya went to visit his friend the Piranha King named Dabao. However, he was confused by the strange state of the fish, and initially he did not attach much importance to it. But when he started eating too quickly, it raised questions in the professor's mind. Then the doctor decided to personally make sure that everything was okay with him and dived under the water. But after swimming several hundred meters, he still couldn't find his friend. Finally seeing him, Dabao began to behave extremely aggressively, and the stunned Guanya immediately began to swim back. But suddenly he discovered that the piranhas were created from the tentacles of an unknown girl. Assuming that she was Zeng's person, the professor decided to help her. But since Siwei had eaten too much fish, she was literally furious. At the same time, Guanya understood perfectly well that she was not an ordinary person, since she was able to deal with all the piranhas, including Dabao. Dotker thought that she could be useful to him, but first he needed to calm her down. At this time, Thunderclap, as always, spent his leisure time surrounded by beauties, to whom he was ready to provide the secret of the evolution of new people, naturally not for free. The girls, in turn, were charmed by the young and strong guy, and he was also quite eloquent. But a moment later, someone opened the front door to his laboratory, and the young man immediately assumed a fighting stance. At that moment, Guanling burst in and instantly attacked the teenager, making it clear that he is a nobody here, and he should not pretend to be a hero. Of course, Thunderclap didn't even think of contradicting her, because he understood perfectly well how it could end for him. The shocked boy stuttered and asked her why she was looking for him, adding that she could have easily come in and asked for a favor, but Lin said that someone was looking for him. An angry Guiyang immediately entered the room and looked at his subordinate. The guy immediately began to serve him and insist that he could have come himself. The ghost sniper said that if he failed the mission again, there would be no more mercy. A stunned Grom couldn't believe that Fanon hadn't completed the mission, since she was his best killer. Finally realizing the terrible truth, he began to say that this would never happen again. But Guiyang said that he was constantly drinking and not taking his work seriously, and everyone was fed up with it. Meanwhile, ordinary monsters are mutating, and they now have several powerful leaders. So this time he handed over the leadership to Guangling, while Xiao Huo would take the mid-level players to clear out the zombie lair. He also ordered that the mutant leader be taken alive for further research. Yuting, in turn, decided to log into the game. She was worried that Susu and Siwei had not appeared in it for a long time. Finally finding herself in the fascinating virtual dimension, she began to explore the area. Walking through familiar places, memories came flooding back and Lin became nostalgic. Suddenly she remembered Fang, who had also abandoned BioShock long ago due to his father's illness. Suddenly she overheard two players talking, and they were discussing Zeng. After all, he led the zombified and evolved quite successfully, after which he became one of the strongest. At the same time, they mentioned the awakening of some unique abilities, but for this it was necessary to receive a letter from the system. Yutin immediately decided to check her mail and indeed found a new message. However, the notification was about helping friends, and the stunned Lin, of course, agreed to set off on the journey. Although it seemed to her that it could have been scammers who intentionally sent her a letter of this nature, at this moment, Fangu suddenly sneezed, thinking that zombies couldn't get sick. Or maybe he didn't know something, and the program hid some information about mutant colds. He also doubted that Yutin would agree to such a suspicious invitation, but he had no other choice. Suddenly, the Beetle Queen in the capsule woke up from her sleep. Zeng was pleasantly surprised that the girl still agreed to respond to his request. Lin, in turn, opened her eyes and began to look around, not understanding where she ended up. After all, initially she thought about helping her friends and discovering the character's hidden profession. However, this place turned out to be quite real, and the girl thought that she had been deceived after all. Unexpectedly, the main character greeted her, and the stunned Yutin looked at the zombie with horror. Naturally, she misunderstood everything and was very scared for her friends, who were dragged into this strange complex by force under the same pretext as her. At the same time, Lin had absolutely no idea what to do or how to get out of this location. The young master saw her pitiful state and asked her to calm down, calling himself Zeng. Of course, Yutin didn't believe him at first and decided to fight back against the cunning mutant. Having declared that he would not be able to deceive her, Fango realized that it would be difficult to convince the girl. Lin said that her friend could not turn into a monster and that it was all a lie. She asked him if he had really captured her friends and was holding them by force, adding that he had better release them because the consequences would be irreversible. At that moment, Yutin began to use her unique skills, and the ground began to crack. The teenager stepped back, not understanding how to calm her down and explain everything. since she was uncontrollable. At the same time, Lin's abilities were at the limit of what was possible. As she entered the body of the Insect Queen, a huge demon suddenly appeared behind her and immediately rushed towards him. But the most important thing is that Mutant had the ability to control the minds of absolutely all beetles. He suddenly assumed that, out of sheer fright, his friend had accidentally activated the technique of a hidden profession. This meant that talking to her was clearly useless, since at the moment it was worth neutralizing her. Thus, Vango immediately rushed into battle against the huge insects. Using his highly effective skills, he managed to destroy a couple of beetles. After a certain amount of time, Zung buried all of Yuting's charges in ice blocks. Then he finally tried to talk to Lin so that she would finally calm down and listen to him. He also encouraged her to look at her reflection, which became the first step towards their mutual understanding. In the shards of ice, Mutant actually saw her own extremely frightening appearance, after which the guy asked to look carefully at the allies panel, where his name was displayed. The shocked girl asked the teenager if it was really him. Soon, Lin finally came to her senses, and then Susu and Zung calmly explained everything to her. Then she realized how oppressive and terrible life was for all mutants. At the same time, Mutant set herself the goal of making the new alliance pay for what they had done, which was part of their team's plans. But Fangu said that at the moment they needed to do something completely different. Naturally, the girl agreed to help her friends and said that she would do everything possible. Zung understood that Lin was actually a bit of a coward, but in the body of the Insect Queen, her combat potential was enormous. And since Zhao was busy building the base, the young man decided to send Yuting to cultivate. Fangu immediately asked the system for a reward for the completed task and a new mission. The program immediately gave him 15,000 gold coins, after which she ordered the destruction of the extremely dangerous Xiaohuo and Guangling who were approaching them. The teenager was surprised by the appearance of such familiar figures. This was a chance to take revenge on Wei. In connection with this, he asked Susu to take on the construction of the city and invited Yutin to come with him. At this time, Lin urged Lin Wei to take this situation seriously, as their existence was at stake. However, the frivolous Xiaohuo, as always, assured that everything was in perfect order and under his control. Suddenly, she asked him if he knew how exactly Feng Ying died, and Wei's expression immediately changed. He said that he was to blame for her death and would definitely take revenge on the mutant leaders, adding that if they failed, reinforcements would arrive in any case. But Guan noted that even they would not help them. After all, if the difference in strength is huge, they will only have one chance. At that moment, she handed him a syringe with an unknown drug. They said it was a booster injection, but it wasn't worth spending it all at once, and they didn't know about the side effects. Naturally, Lin Wei didn't listen to her, and immediately injected himself with a syringe into his shoulder. As a result, the veins on his face immediately bulged and his eyes blazed with fire. And after a couple of seconds, it completely ignited, which was to be expected from this injection. At this time, Siyue suddenly regained consciousness and opened her eyes. Finding herself in an unknown place, she began to look around. Not knowing where she was, Si suddenly remembered her friends. Dr. Guanya immediately appeared on the screen opposite her and greeted the young talent. Stating that she had eaten too much of the mutated fish and had passed out, he also reported her condition to Fang and the others. The girl listened to the professor in silence, realizing that she had made a mistake once again. The professor urged Z not to worry about this, as she had a culinary journey ahead of her. He added that he had prepared new clothes for her in the room and was waiting for her in the laboratory. Naturally, she was only happy with this turn of events and went to Guanya. After swimming underwater for several meters, the doctor noticed that this was the abyss of the Sleeping Titan. These ruins also belonged to an ancient civilization, and the wall paintings contained many legends. However, he himself was absolutely sure that all this was not a fairy tale, but a true story. In the fresco to their left, they found evidence that humans had long possessed nuclear technology, and the energy cores that they managed to find were only a small part, dug out from the ruins. But at the same time, ancient people have long believed in the existence of higher powers in the form of various gods. Specifically, their deity was a giant beast sleeping in the depths of the earth. People built an underwater temple to worship this monster, and having saturated it with energy, it fell into a deep sleep. Ancient civilizations feared such creatures because they possessed incredible power, capable of collapsing the heavens and the earth. His strength came not from his fighting skills but from the mutagenic genes he carried within himself. Soon, this virus began to spread and multiply, putting everyone at risk. No one knew where this plague that destroyed so many lives came from, but everyone understood that it was the work of monsters, because nuclear wars of people did not cause such mutations, but only awakened monsters. As a result, the furious demons released their mutagenic genes throughout the world. What was happening got out of people's control, so they could only flee. But if the source of the virus can be found and studied, it might be possible to cure millions and restore Faye to her human form. However, The path from the temple to the monster is too long, and along the way they will encounter extremely dangerous monsters. Suddenly, Guanya looked at Siyue, who, as always, had found herself a meal. In this regard, he urged the girl not to be distracted by food, as this could lead to trouble. At this time, Maradurka was walking around the city and suddenly heard a strange noise. She turned around and saw no one, after which she continued on her way. But the sound grew louder, and the demoness instantly struck the ground from where the strange noise was coming. Carefully examining the depths of the earth, the monster did not notice anyone. But as soon as she rose up, Guangling pierced right through her chest. This was a fatal blow. Lin noted that hunting such creatures had become an extremely boring activity. Xiao Huo mentioned that they could go to the thorn forest where higher-level monsters lived. At that moment, their charges came to their aid and admired the work of their leaders. The girls were absolutely delighted with Lin Wei because he, as always, boasted about his skills. Suddenly, a Shiba Inu appeared behind one of them and rushed to attack her. As a result, he eliminated the target with just one blow, and everyone was shocked by what happened. A perplexed Guan couldn't understand where this mutated dog came from. Moreover, the analyzer informed them that the dog was a low-ranking creature. But Lin was sure that he had simply evolved, so she urged everyone to stick together. At this time, Siyue and Gonya continued their dangerous journey, where they were hunted by a huge snake that looked like an eel. Naturally, they decided to fight the monster, and Sei released her piranha tentacles, who instantly dealt with the aquatic mutant, tearing off his head. The doctor also did not remain idle, and directed his furious attacks at the sharks that swam up to them. Having finally overcome all ill-wishers, they swam out to an unknown place. The professor noticed that this was a sanctuary. There were stone statues everywhere. They slowly walked towards the main door. Looking around, Guanya said that according to legend there should be a demon guarding the temple here. However, no one met them, which seemed quite strange to him. After passing by one of the statues, she suddenly mutated, but C and the doctor did not notice. At this time, long and sharp tentacles began to emerge from the pedestal, after which the monster came to life and hastened to attack the travelers. But at the very last moment, Siyue seemed to sense danger behind her and managed to block the monster's attack. Following him, all the statues came to life, turning into huge mutants, which made the task more difficult. The professor and Z immediately prepared for battle, but the monsters turned out to be quite strong. Despite this, Guanya fired several projectiles at them, and one of the demons fell to the ground. But once again, numerous tentacles began to crawl out from it, which they did not expect at all. Moreover, their regeneration was superior to that of other mutated creatures. Thus, one of the statues recovered fairly quickly and continued its advance. The stunned doctor noted that no matter what damage was done to them, they had the ability to divide. In this regard, he urged Siyue to take a defensive position and prevent the division of mutants. But looking at Z's actions, he realized that she didn't need his recommendations at all, because her piranha tentacles simply devoured entire statues, thereby preventing them from regenerating. The girl was truly extremely skilled in fighting the monsters, using her unique techniques. Having brought down several mutated statues, all that was left was for Siyue to quickly defeat the last demon. Guangling, in turn, was left alone with Xiaohuo against the zombie dogs. The rest died. At the same time, they asked just one question. How exactly did dogs undergo such incredible evolution? Lin Wei immediately began to use his new skills and burst into flames. He stated that in his current state, he was capable of dealing with these puppies himself. By bravely rushing into battle, he forced the dog to retreat, because everything around was covered in flames. But Guan urged him to conserve his strength, as the animal could take advantage of the moment and wear Wei down. A moment later, something inexplicable appeared behind them, and they suddenly jumped aside. The magic projectile immediately hit the ground, and the perplexed Xiaohuo couldn't understand who attacked them this time. At this moment, Qin approached them and said that he should have recognized her. Adding that she had long dreamed of this meeting, Lin Wei was shocked by this turn of events. Naturally, he recognized the girl. Wondering how she managed to survive, Xiaohuo asked her if she liked the new zombie look. Qin smiled, after which she said that in this state she was capable of tearing him to shreds. Of course, the arrogant youth doubted this and immediately became enraged, noting that she couldn't handle him as he had acquired incredible strength. Suddenly, a little demoness descended from Qin's shoulder, and the girl said that she would kill him for the sake of her child. Even Guangling didn't expect to hear this, let alone the shocked Wei. Realizing the turn the situation had taken, Lin immediately took flight. Having jumped onto the roof of the house, she still could not understand why the mutants had become so strong. But suddenly, T09 blocked her path, declaring that she would not be able to escape. The extremely self-confident Guan immediately took up the fight and began to deliver crushing blows. However, the demoness did not even move from her place, asking if this was all she was capable of, after which T09 threw her to the ground and began to brutally beat her. But at a certain point, Lin still managed to escape her grip and jump to the side. Realizing how strong an opponent she had got, It was therefore necessary to take her by cunning. In addition, Guangling injected herself with a rabies injection, and her powers instantly increased. At the same time, her appearance also changed dramatically, with bulging veins covering her from head to toe. The muscular warrior immediately began to radiate an incredible aura around herself. T09 wasted no time in attacking her. Lin knew she was clearly a test subject. And with her newfound strength, she will definitely be able to deal with the zombified woman. Which is basically what started to happen, and Guan quickly took over the initiative. The zombie could only defend itself and had no opportunity to counterattack. As a result, she flew to the edge of the roof, which Lin decided to take advantage of. However, T09 suddenly jumped up and said that she was just warming up, and now the real battle will begin. The stunned Guanling did not understand what she meant. Several more limbs suddenly began to grow on her back, which radically changed the situation. A few seconds later, a 6-armed demoness appeared before her. Lin did not expect such a transformation from her. As a result, Dali grabbed her by the arms and began to deliver crushing blows. It seemed that nothing could save Guan, since she could do nothing to oppose her. Having beaten up the self-confident girl quite a bit, she asked her patron what to do with her next. Fangu, in turn, praised her for her good work and ordered her to be taken back for questioning. At the same time, he felt sorry that everything happened exactly this way, because Mutant didn't even warm up. Knowing that when the Alliance learns of the loss of their fighters, they will obviously send stronger candidates. This meant that they needed to find out about the situation within the human clan. Guanya and Z, in turn, continued to explore the temple. Xue had her fill of another batch of monsters, and the doctor was trying to discern the hidden mechanism of the sanctuary. But suddenly the girl felt ill and she instantly jumped up. The stunned professor did not understand what had happened to her. He could only watch Z's strange behavior and guess what was going on. A moment later, she vomited a profuse amount of blood, which was extremely disgusting. But at that very moment, the temple mechanism was activated, and magical rays appeared everywhere. Everything around shook violently, and various decorations began to move apart, thus forming a secret passage. As Guanya stated, it all looked extremely strange. But then he realized that in order to open the secret tunnel, the monster's genome was needed, since it was a genetic lock. However, they could only guess where exactly this secret passage led. Finally rushing forward, they saw an unimaginable picture where mutated dinosaurs were located, which happily fed on carrion from smaller representatives of reptiles. Suddenly, one of them was attacked by a larger monster in the form of an orangutan. Having killed the dinosaur, he also began to feast on its meat and instantly grew wings. At that moment, he noticed a beam passing through the sanctuary and reaching into the heavens. Xue and Guan began to walk forward along it. It all seemed simply unreal. The professor suggested that they had discovered an underground world, full of its inhabitants and secrets. Suddenly, they heard heavy footsteps behind them and, turning around, saw a huge monkey. The stunned doctor noted that this was an ancient mutant, and they had entered the territory of the god's lair. It seemed that he himself did not expect to see something like this, but such was reality. Brave Xue immediately prepared for battle and released her tentacles. The huge orangutan was also unfriendly and walked towards her. Suddenly, he aimed his large organic weapons at her, which opened up before her like a flower. But the brave girl jumped inside them herself, which the monster did not expect, naively believing that now she was finished and he could switch to a half-cyborg. However, everything was not as simple as he wanted, because C knew what she was doing. The self-confident Guanya also understood what was happening and said that the demon could not harm anyone. And after a couple of seconds, C destroyed the monster from the inside, starting to tear apart its organs. The mutated orangutan, in turn, experienced extremely painful sensations. At the same time, she began to literally devour the demon's flesh. The professor was amazed by this outcome. At that moment, they suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the huge tree. The frightened doctor assumed that what was destined would soon come true. Because the god had awakened and was eager to appear, even Xue stopped eating. Meanwhile, Zeng was with Yuting on the roof of the building, looking down at the ruins of the city. The system, in turn, gave him a generous reward for eliminating Guangling. Now he could fully cover the debt for his father's treatment. But the most important thing is that if you send your fellow tribesmen on a mission, the reward increases. The program recommended raising as many monsters as possible, as he couldn't handle the alliance alone. Naturally, Fang himself understood this perfectly well, so he focused on developing the clan. At this time, Qin and his daughter created a real hell for Xiaohuo, which is why he went into hiding. After all, he understood that he simply couldn't cope with her and her little demoness. In addition, he ran out of the evolution potion, without which his powers are limited. After a couple of minutes, Qin finally found him hiding behind the rubble of the building. A frightened Xiaohuo urged her not to approach him. Of course, she did not listen to him. The girl then showed him a syringe with a rabies injection and asked if this was what he was looking for. Throwing the potion at his feet, she said that she had a lot of this drug. Naive Thunderclap immediately grabbed a syringe and injected himself into the neck, saying that now she would see his true power. However, the effect was slightly different, causing his body to instantly swell. Qin smiled and said that his body simply could not withstand an overdose of the potion. A couple of minutes later, he was completely torn to pieces, which is exactly what the cunning girl wanted. Thus, Xiao Huo was finished, which made the protagonist extremely happy. At the sight of Thunder's remains, Qin saw a stone blazing with fire, and she became curious about what it was. Taking it in her hands, it suddenly dawned on her that it was actually an energy core. At this time, the young master went with Yuting to the dungeon where they held the wounded Guan. The program, in turn, belatedly transferred 30,000 coins to Zeng for killing Xiao Huo. Lin understood that the best reward in this case was death, but it was not granted to her. Fangu urged her to speak more clearly and only to the point, threatening her with physical violence. Hearing his voice, Guangling asked who it was. As she was blindfolded, the guy approached her and said that she didn't need to know who he was, and that it would be better to answer his questions. The girl immediately asked what exactly he wanted to know, and there was a momentary pause. Zeng then replied with great confidence that she should tell him everything about the alliance. With a heavy sigh, Lin finally agreed to inform him of the new people's affairs. Her story took about half an hour, but Fangu still doubted that she had told everything. Based on her words, he understood one thing. The players had already begun using the evolutionary drugs created by Qin. Even though most of the warriors were real people, the young man had no intention of standing on ceremony with them. The teenager then asked if she knew the person who was assigned to the rebel account. Guan answered in the negative, asking him in return how a zombie could talk at all, after which she began to demand that the mutant fulfill his promise and let her go. But Zeng corrected her, saying that he had promised not to kill her, not to free her. Taking the Yuting insect in his hands, Fangu leaned towards her, and with a smile on his face said that she should help him. Then he forced her to swallow the creature, which she of course did not really want to do. The guy noted that now he would merge with her forever, and this was her punishment. Her body instantly began to burn from the inside, and Guan asked what he had done to her. Lin replied that the worm would give her strength and she should thank them for it, adding that if she did not obey their orders, the insect would simply tear her apart from the inside. Zeng added that from now on, she was obliged to constantly stay close to Guiyang and listen to their orders. They soon released her, and Lin went to the Phantom Sniper, telling him that she had failed the mission. But he didn't scold her, saying that very soon they would go on the counteroffensive and the mutants would come to an end. Iron Man, in turn, was absolutely confident of a quick victory, which he declared, but Jan urged him to take the enemy seriously, as some of them were not afraid of them at all. Besides, they really were extremely dangerous. But the big guy stood his ground and boasted about his squad of robotic girls. Meanwhile, teacher Zhang was taking a bath carefree and thinking about what to do. Suddenly, she remembered BioShock and immediately put on her virtual reality glasses. When Yeyu entered the game, she didn't see anyone nearby, so she concluded that not everyone had made it to Biochemical City. But a couple of minutes later, the teacher saw a whole female iron squad in the sky, which literally flew over her head. She found it quite fascinating, realizing that she hadn't been in the game for a long time and that something interesting had apparently happened. In connection with this, she rushed after them, as curiosity got the better of her. At that moment, Baba noticed her and decided to practice a little, especially since the girl was alone. Without thinking twice, he began to sneak up on her, waiting for the right moment. Besides, he was eager to demonstrate his unique skills once again. However, Zhang managed to block his attacks with a protective barrier, which Li did not expect. Thus, a battle ensued between them, and the guy began to realize that he had underestimated her. Yeyu, in turn, saw such a fast and agile zombified person for the first time. Realizing that he was clearly stronger than her, she began to retreat, but it was not so easy to do. In this regard, she decided to distract him and fired into the air, thereby signaling to her brothers. As a result of the appearance of 3 mahjong tiles, Baba immediately stopped the chase. Realizing that allies would soon come to her aid, it was necessary to flee. But this time, Zhang decided to detain him until reinforcements arrived, so as not to leave him any chance of escape. In fact, he, Zeng, and the rest of his teammates had long ago come up with this way of alerting each other to danger. Meanwhile, Yeyu continued to attack the mutant, trying to hold him off for as long as possible. While delivering his furious blows with the blade, Li could only defend himself and had no opportunity to leave the battlefield. Zhang, in turn, only pressed on him, and Baba again began to block her attacks. At a certain point, his rage went beyond the limit, and the guy took the initiative in the fight. At the same time, he said that now it was the end for her. The stunned teacher could not understand how a zombie could talk. A moment later, Li pushed through Zhang's shield and blocked her blade, causing the girl to step back, after which he rushed to carry out a series of crushing blows. Yayu could not keep up with such fast movements. Baba suddenly called on her to surrender or accept her death. The teacher began to understand that she really couldn't handle this big guy. Also, her allies had not appeared yet, but unexpectedly they finally came. The protagonist called on Lee to stop immediately, and the perplexed Baba did not understand what was going on. Zhang was completely shocked by what was happening, and her only chance for salvation was to flee. But the young master still tried to calm her down and explain that the virtual world had changed somewhat. Of course, Yayu didn't listen to him and hit Fangu. The young man immediately flew back. Then, taking advantage of the situation, the teacher hurried to leave the video game. Everyone began to realize that it would not be easy to convince Jiang, while people continued to run amok in the forest. At the same time, they intended to capture as many mutant leaders as possible. Within a few minutes, they successfully cleared the area of monsters. But suddenly, one of the representatives of the new alliance sensed the approach of another demon. After dodging T-07's attack, she fired back. But the girl also dodged the bullets. Realizing how fast the enemy was, she began to use all her skills. The division captain, in turn, did not expect such a dexterous, zombified one, who suddenly directed her deadly ribbons in her direction. But they never hit their target. In response, the human clan warrior took aim once again. She then fired an energy weapon, but T-07 again escaped the explosion. Then the girl immediately flew to the side with the help of her power steering, trying to keep her at a distance because, in close combat, she was a great danger. Using her electric discharges, she also failed to catch the nimble mutant. Because of this, she had to call for reinforcements, and within a couple of minutes, new people arrived to help her. But even with a whole squad, they could not defeat the elusive zombified creature. One of the subordinates informed the captain that most of the monsters had fled to the center of the forest. At this moment, T-07 also rushed towards the central area of the forest thicket. The people of Eden began to realize that she was simply stalling for time so that her pack could escape. Naturally, they followed her, intending to destroy all mutants. Suddenly, they saw half-cyborgs flying towards them, which signaled a new battle. The puzzled leader of the female robot legion asked them who they were. Susu responded with great confidence that they were the ones who would happily exterminate the Alliance, causing them to start exchanging fire. However, Zhao had a secret weapon in the form of a huge magnet that began to remove the metal armor from all the warriors. As a result, people lost absolutely all weapons and equipment, which made it impossible to continue the fight, which is exactly what the cunning Susu had wanted. Meanwhile, the teacher continued to take a bath while playing BioShock, after which she instantly tore off her virtual reality glasses, not understanding what they were. Zhang couldn't think of anything else but the strange mutant who wanted to talk to her about something. At the same time, she knew that updates in the game were extremely frequent, and even old players sometimes couldn't keep up with them. The main character was in his laboratory, thinking about what had happened. The young master also considered the account's personal data, which, logically, could not be stolen. Moreover, the Alliance leader turned out to be extremely intractable. Zheng even doubted that it was his account. In this regard, Fang decided to turn to Guangling for help, since she had recently become his spy. Suddenly, the system notified the owner of a new location called the Dark Ice Plain, where new monsters needed to be subdued, and the Alliance was already in that territory. And to allow players to progress further, the game has sped up the process of unlocking new areas. Zheng understood that this was indeed logical, but he didn't know how the opening of these zones worked. The program, in turn, began to show him various signatures of areas. At this time, Siyue, as always, enjoyed tasting another piece of the monster's carrion. Professor Guanya just watched her appetite from the side and was surprised, not understanding how so much food could fit in it. A green glow suddenly appeared in front of them. C instantly prepared for battle and spread out her powerful tentacles. But the doctor urged her to calm down, stating that there was no threat, adding that these slabs represented a kind of map of the world. But this was the first time he had seen an area with mention of some dark ice plain. Siyue was only concerned about one thing: was there anything tasty there? Suddenly, an earthquake began. Looking up, they discovered a whole flock of unusual birds flying to the east. The girl started screaming, and Professor Guanya immediately pulled her by the hand, asking her not to attract attention. However, they still noticed a green glow on the map and landed instantly. As it turned out, these were unknown creatures similar to humans. But with wings, they saw the activation of the Dark Ice Plain. Not understanding who did this, they decided to continue on their way to the ceremony of the ancient true gods. But suddenly, the monsters heard some noise behind them and began to look around. Guanya and Z hid behind the bushes, watching what was happening, hoping not to be discovered. Qin said that these giants were clearly descendants of the ancient gods, and they were lucky enough to see them. However, at that moment, he was grabbed by a huge boy who became curious about who he was. Siyue couldn't help him in any way and only watched the giants' actions. Suddenly, the boy asked if they were really 7th-level game creatures. Naturally, they didn't understand what was being discussed. So the kid asked again how people got into this territory. Finally, Seed tried to take the doctor away from the mutated boy and grabbed his hands with her tentacles, but she was unable to bite through them, which spoke of the incredibly thick skin of these people. Realizing that he couldn't escape, Guanya urged Siyue to run away immediately and leave him here. But the boy managed to grab her too, so they both found themselves in danger. Sensing a certain smell coming from Z, the young man began to lick the girl, talking about how she ate some guardian of justice, and he found it funny. Suddenly, a loud sound began to come from the side, which they could hardly bear. The boy noted with a smile that their bodies were too weak for the demonic waves. Then, activating an unknown portal, he threw Professor Guan and Siyue into it, adding that they need to return back to their world, but they will definitely meet. A few seconds later, they appeared on the territory of the Dark Ice Plane. With snow all around them, the doctor immediately rushed to see and asked if everything was okay with her. At the same time, he noticed that one of the girl's tentacles contained the flesh of that boy. Guanya asked if she had managed to bite off part of his body, and the young man himself headed to the ceremony, where absolutely everyone present chanted the name of Archduke Abaddon. The extremely smiling guy urged them to greet their patron with all the honors. Meanwhile, Zhao's half-cyborgs continued to influence people with their magnets. In doing so, they completely disarmed them, thus leaving the squad in danger. Susu immediately went to the captain and said that she had lost. Soon, news of the Alliance Legion's liquidation reached Ghost Sniper and Iron Man. Naturally, they were indignant about this, and the gloating, bloodthirsty Blade stated that they should have listened to her. After all, if they had initially given the zombified ones to her team, they would have avoided such shame. Iron Man was furious and eager to fight, saying that he had long wanted to test his new armor. Blade, of course, supported him, and only Guiyang silently followed them. Teacher Jiang, in turn, could not get the sudden encounter with the strange zombie out of her head. She was extremely curious about what exactly the mutant wanted to explain to her, and how he learned to speak in the first place. In connection with this, she decided to find the young master to ask him about what had happened. When Yeyu set off for school, she immediately rushed to class where she found a whole group of friends. Naturally, she immediately asked them what was happening in the BioShock game, but everyone answered as one that they had no idea, which seemed rather strange to her. Moreover, they behaved suspiciously calmly and completely without emotion. Hugging Zeng, she began to talk about how he needed to log into the game with her, because the demons had become much stronger. Yeyu knew that after these words, the team's reaction was always violent, and they all entered the video game together. In addition, the girls were constantly jealous of Fangu and each other, so they often made scandals. But now, they all looked at the teacher silently, without any emotion. Jiang was genuinely scared, not understanding what was happening to them and why they were so inert, as if someone had replaced them. Yeyu was furious at what was happening and headed for the exit. In the evening, she hurried to log into the game to finally find answers to her questions. However, when the teacher appeared in the game dimension, she found her character in an unfamiliar place. Suddenly, Zeng spoke to her and welcomed her to his base. The teenager said that this was his territory, called the City of Hope. Naturally, as expected, Yeyu began to attack him without any further ado. However, Fangu only dodged the blows and did not attack in response, calling on her to calm down and listen to him. But the restless girl continued to behave extremely aggressively, and the young man again tried to calm her down. Suddenly, the teacher asked if her friend's condition was his doing. Zeng replied that it was not that simple. But this was enough for Yeyu to misunderstand everything and rush towards him again with her sword. With the help of his powerful tentacles, Fangu blocked all of her lightning strikes. Zhang simply couldn't do anything to resist him or even hurt him, which she never expected from a zombie. But she had no intention of giving up. Bravely throwing herself into battle, Zeng still dodged her furious attacks, realizing that if things continued like this, his base would be completely destroyed. At a certain moment, he finally managed to time it and tied Yeyu with his tentacles, after which the young man hastened to declare that he was her student named Fangu. Surprised, Jiang asked why he hadn't said so right away, and Zeng replied that she hadn't given him the opportunity. She had a lot of questions about why he became zombified, and when this possibility appeared in the game, Mutant immediately greeted the teacher. Yeyu was simply shocked, because Lin had really changed a lot and was literally hanging from the ceiling. She then jumped to the ground and confirmed the teenager's words that they were now mutants. Soon they finally got the chance to tell the long story of how exactly it happened. Zeng also stated that the system gave him a task to invite a new member to his team. Of course, teacher Yeyu agreed to help her friends because that's exactly what she came for. After a short period of time, Zhang appeared before everyone in a completely different image, after which they finally set out on a long journey where it was necessary to destroy the new alliance, which turned out to be quite a criminal organization, but few people guessed about it. But before that, Fangu decided to show Yeyu their domain, starting to take her to incredibly beautiful places. Suddenly, Baba rushed to his friends to inform them of the human invasion. Following him, Bloodthirsty Blade appeared and asked Zung if he was the leader of the zombies. At the same time, she neutralized Lee with just one blow, and the guy instantly assumed a horizontal position. The protagonist didn't have time to answer her before the rest of the Alliance representatives suddenly came to her aid. Iron Man immediately began to emit his laser beams, destroying everything around him. Blade, in turn, decided to deal with the young ruler of the monsters, intending to get his head. Zung smiled and said in response that she clearly did not have the strength to do it. His team also prepared for battle. Yuting and Jiang immediately split up, after which Yeyu launched an attack, something that Bloodthirsty Blade had not expected. At the same time, Jiang moved quite quickly and the girl simply could not keep up with her. As a result, she began to swing her swords, hoping to hit her. However, at the last moment, the teacher managed to pick up Baba and take him to a safe place. This naturally infuriated her opponent, who was momentarily distracted from the battle with Fangu. But then, she pounced on him again with furious attacks of her blades. But Zung easily blocked her efforts and reduced all the blows to nothing, which surprised the warrior. At the same time, the teenager called on Mutant to heal Baba so that he could help them in the fight with the people. Lin instantly released her healing snail, which immediately headed towards Lee. The guy remarked that this was extremely disgusting because he doesn't like insects. But after a couple of seconds, his strength returned and he could continue to fight the Alliance, which is what he did to rehabilitate himself in the eyes of his teammates. Baba immediately attacked Bloodthirsty Blade, something she was not prepared for. By striking the ground, Lee set a trap for the people and the others began to run away. Mutant said that in fact she was an extremely weak person and was not a rival to them at the moment. As expected, Bloodthirsty Blade chased after them, trying to catch up with them. Meanwhile, Iron Man hurried to his girls to throw them into battle as well. The delighted girls rushed into his arms, saying that they would do everything possible. Susu, in turn, received the coordinates and hurried to open fire. As a result, the semi-cyborgs received the task of attacking this territory, but Iron Man managed to activate a protective barrier, which absorbed all the damage. However, most of the area was subjected to massive rocket attacks. Fangu remarked that if Zhao overdid it, the entire city would turn to ashes, but the girl replied that they would rebuild a new one, after which she once again rushed towards the Alliance's minions to relieve their suffering. Unexpectedly, several representatives of the criminal race nevertheless made their way up behind them. But Teacher Jiang came to the rescue in time and neutralized the threat. Lin immediately began to summon her monsters so that they would also help them in the battle with the people. A moment later, a swarm of flies appeared and headed towards the Alliance clan. With each passing minute, their numbers only increased, which increased their chances of winning. At this time, Dr. Guanya lit a fire and thus made a halt. He placed the given offspring from the demon in a flask and examined it for a long time. Sue found new food, but this time she didn't like it, which was surprising, because the girl usually devoured absolutely everything and was never picky about it. A couple of minutes later, a huge ice wolf king approached them. Feeling a terrible hunger, C immediately rushed towards the monster to get its meat. A stunned Guanya noted that they were here for the first time and should not act rashly. But Siyue didn't listen to him and directed her powerful tentacles at the monster. However, they could not do anything to him. At a certain point, the wolf bit off a part of them, which became a real problem for them, since they didn't have any special weapons. Meanwhile, a whole flock of ice animals came up to them, which they did not expect at all. C continued to strike, but to no avail. So she came up with another plan. By wrapping one of them in tentacles, she exposed him to the attack of another beast. Thus, the wolf gnawed out the throat of his fellow tribesman, which is what Siyue wanted, who even managed to feast on the exquisite meat of the frost creatures. Mutant, in turn, continued to set extremely dangerous flies on people. Their poisonous bites were quite noticeable and difficult to resist, because there were a huge number of them, and they had decent speed and were also small in size. Several dozen insects headed towards Iron Man. He immediately began to shoot them with his flame launcher, emitting fire. Most of them turned to ash. However, others still attacked the brute, but they were unable to bite through such thick armor. Lin knew it was high time they were upgraded so they could handle such giants. At that moment, his subordinate ran up to him and asked for help, because she was being chased by flies. But he demanded that she not come near him, because by doing so they would harm him too. Naturally, she didn't listen to him, and Iron Man burned her to ashes along with the insects. However, the number of beetles kept increasing, and he did not understand how to deal with them. At the same time, he continued to burn his girls along with the monsters with absolute calm, claiming that this was a necessary measure, and he could not act otherwise since the Legion had disobeyed him. Baba meanwhile hurried to the Bloodthirsty Blade, intending to finally deal with her. The Alliance warrior began to understand that at this rate, they really would not survive. Lee noted that she could only strike from behind, as she couldn't withstand a head-on collision. She herself understood perfectly well that she would not be able to cope with him unless someone covered for her. but the mutants were mercilessly killing people, and there was nowhere to wait for help. Suddenly, the wounded girl appeared right at her feet. This once again proved that they would not be able to defeat such dangerous monsters. Baba pounced on her again, dealing crushing blows, forcing her to surrender. But Bloody Blade had no intention of doing so and hurried to block his attacks. Although this was quite difficult to do, since Lee possessed incredible strength. Then, she resorted to the evolution potion, which became her only chance for salvation. A moment later, she bit through the ampule and thereby absorbed its contents. The effect was immediate. Her veins all over her body began to bulge, indicating an incredible surge of strength. Bloodthirsty Blade broke into a smile and said that she was now ready for battle. Baba realized that now it would really be more difficult for him to withstand her blows. She then aimed her swords at the stone Lee, who was having difficulty blocking the attacks. Realizing that he couldn't handle her, because she had become much stronger, sensing her advantage, Bloodthirsty Blade hastened to finish him off. But at the most crucial moment, the young ruler of the mutants unexpectedly appeared. Fangu instantly suppressed the enraged woman's unimaginable power. In doing so, he used the power of frost, and the warrior's sword became stuck in a block of ice. In doing so, he forced her to flee the battlefield without her unique weapon. Zung also ordered his teammates not to pursue people if they escaped. Iron Man continued to go crazy and destroy everything with his flaming guns. Seeing this, Bloodthirsty Blade instantly rushed towards him and called for him to stop, proposing a slightly different plan of action to finish off the Demon Lord together. But noticing that there was practically no one left from the Alliance besides them, they decided to retreat altogether. Finally taking off into the air, they rushed to the base to report everything to the boss. Zhang asked Fang if she should stop them, but Zeng, to her surprise, refused to do so, stating that they were scared and that this would be enough to temporarily restore their strength. In doing so, he had to spend 200,000 gold to rebuild the zombie lair. Suddenly, the program notified him that Siwei was in the Dark Ice Valley. She even managed to defeat the Wolf King, and the system rewarded him with gold. Susu immediately reported that Guanya sent her the coordinates. In this regard, Fang urged Yuten to remain at the base and wait for a new attack from the Alliance people. He himself decided to set out on a journey to Z and the Doctor, taking Zhang and Zhao with him on the journey. The professor, in turn, could not understand whether he had managed to send a signal to the Allies or not. Due to severe radio interference, it was simply impossible to track this. Siwei suddenly smelled a delicious aroma and reported it to Dr. Guan, who was forced to follow her. Thus, they reached the settlement of the Snow Shield Titan tribe. At this time, the main character and his team were approaching the icy territory of the Dark Plane. Where Susu's maid delivered them fairly quickly, the teacher was worried about Sei, because there was no one to protect her except the professor. But the young zombie ruler was sure that she was okay. After all, the system regularly informed him that Siwei had acquired a new skill. She survived in the wild better than entire squads, so there was no need to worry about her. Suddenly, the program alerted Zhao to an approaching snowstorm, which he needed to wait out in shelter. However, Fangu said that it was too late to retreat, and they would have to move on. But at that very moment, they suddenly fell through the ice into an unknown cave. It seemed as if they were literally falling into the abyss, as the flight was too long. As a result, the landing could clearly have been extremely painful, and Zeng immediately curled up with his team into a cocoon. During the flight, they hit icy rock several times, which was also not very pleasant. Moreover, it soon became clear that they simply did not have enough oxygen, and this became a problem. The teenager began to think about what to do in this situation and felt something soft behind his back. Turning around, he noticed that he was lying on Teacher Yayu. After asking the teacher for forgiveness, he immediately removed his hand from her thigh, after which Fangu tried to get off her, but it was so cramped in the cocoon that it was impossible. At a certain point, Susu started to feel dizzy, which became another problem. Suddenly, they came across rocky terrain again, and the girls pressed Zeng from both sides. After a couple of minutes, they finally landed in an unknown location where there was also extreme cold and snow everywhere. The system immediately informed the owner that they had entered the secret territory of the ice plane. The teenager decided to use it to learn as much as possible about this place, but the program did not provide him with this opportunity. But at the same time, she gave him another task, which was to subjugate an entire tribe and become their leader. Suddenly, Zhang pressed her ear to the ground and heard heavy footsteps, which she reported to the clan leader. Then Fangu climbed onto the huge robot Susu to find out what was coming at them. He also intended to test the new ability that Siwei had given him by killing the Wolf King. In the distance, he discovered an unknown tribe of people. They were dressed in animal skins. But Zhao said that they were actually giants, and they clearly had no good intentions when they rushed towards them. So she suggested that they take refuge in the cave, but Zeng objected, saying that they would not do that. Meanwhile, the huge girls continued to run towards them. Fangu froze in place. The young man intended to defeat the giants in order to finally fulfill the system's mission. Having started to strike the thugs, he was unable to harm them. Moreover, they did not pay any attention to him at all. The main character was outraged by what was happening and could not understand where they were going. Having run a little further, they were suddenly attacked by other players who began to exterminate the giants. Thus, a real meat grinder began. But the giants seemed to be under some kind of hypnosis, because they did not respond to the thugs and continued to move in an unknown direction. Then, the enraged Fangu decided to teach the overconfident people from the Alliance a lesson. A moment later, several of the human guild's minions fell at his hands. They, in turn, simply could not do anything against such a strong Zheng. At that moment, a huge woman approached him. She was the leader of the snow dwarf tribe named Amir. She thanked her savior, but refused to bow before him. Explaining that he was a representative of a different kind, the perplexed boy asked whether the strongest really became the leader. Amir began to tell him a story about how one day an uninvited guest came to them and ate all the food supplies. They then went in search of provisions and came across a clan of unusual people. Fangu assumed she was talking about Siyue, who always stole food wherever she went. After all, only she was capable of such a thing. The others also had no doubts about C's involvement. Thus, because of her, Zheng was unable to complete the system's task, which was an extremely unexpected turn of events for him.